You've achieved everything you were supposed to, and something still feels off. That's not a personal failure. That's the trap of force-driven success. And today's guest has spent her career helping high performers break out of it. Today, I'm joined by Cortney McDermott, award-winning author, TEDx speaker, and executive coach who has presented at Oxford Business School, Mindvalley, and Nectar Island. She's a former C-suite executive who now helps leaders stop chasing success from fear and start leading from alignment. Cortney doesn't just talk about this. She's lived it, blew it up, and rebuilt it from the inside out. You're going to want to take notes on this one. Let's get into it. Welcome to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. We discuss ancient wisdom, real-world experiences, and the latest concepts on mastering leadership of self and others. If you're committed to maximizing your life and your impact on the world, you're home. Welcome to the No Limit Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Sean Patton. And today I'm joined by Cortney McDermott. She's an award-winning author, speaker, and executive coach whose work bridges self-development and business strategy. She's been featured in Inc., Women's Health, NBC, the Huffington Post, Mind, Body, Green, and Success, and has spoken on human potential at TEDx, Mindvalley, Oxford Business School, and Nectar Island. She's a former C-suite executive that now helps high performers shift from force-driven success to aligned, internally sourced leadership. Cortney, thanks for being on today.
Hey, Sean. I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
We got connected through Dr. Anna Marie, who was on the podcast, and her and I had a really fun time. And she was like, all right, that was awesome. You got to talk to my friend Cortney. And we connected. And here we are. So I'm excited that we made it work.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I love Anna Marie. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, one of the phrases that I've heard you use that I thought was very interesting and I want to jump into is the phrase miserably successful. What does that look like? And what are you talking about when you said someone is miserably successful?
Yeah. So when I wrote my first book, Change Starts Within You, it was about getting to that place that everyone says, once you get there, you'll be a success and you'll feel great. And I kept getting there. I kept getting to those places and, I had all the titles and the accolades and, I was jet setting all over the world. And, I was a mother, I was a wife, I was a marathon runner, I had the Jimmy shoes, but I joked that I was miserably successful. And it wasn't only in jest. It was this idea that success kind of perennially lies behind some corner. And as soon as you get this next thing, you'll be okay. And what I kept realizing over and over again is that just wasn't the case and that chasing externalities were never going to lead to my happiness. And so that, like I said, inspired the first book and the TEDx talk. And then from there kind of dove deeper and deeper into the reinvention process and basically like what happens when you blow up the Phoenix, and what can you be on the other side and what potentials await. So yeah, that's where miserably successful came from.
It seems to be, from obviously you wrote a book and then you speak on it and your people sort of rallied around that. Why do you think that feeling of miserably successful seems to be such a common experience?
Well, once again, because we're chasing something outside of us that's only found within. And it's the ultimate sort of paradox and joke, if you will. It's just this idea that your happiness, your fulfillment, your peace lie outside of you. And coming home is a little bit like Dorothy when she realizes she had the way all along, right? And you can click your ruby slippers inside yourself and realize actually peace exists right here, right now, regardless of whatever's happening outside. And when you start to awaken to that, then the things that you were chasing, they actually kind of come to you and you don't even care that much anymore, whether they do or they don't. And so it's a beautiful, I think it's a beautiful kind of searching until you come back to where you started.
What's so interesting there, and I think this is, I'm glad we're talking about what on its surface can almost seem like a paradox, because it's actually something I've been thinking about a lot and very recently around this, if everything was, our happiness, fulfillment is all within inside of us, right? We're not chasing anything external, yet you as an example, okay, you do that, but you still have this drive to go do, right? Like you're still giving keynotes and you're still traveling and you're still like, and so from externally, someone looks at you like, it looks like you're still striving. Like it doesn't look like there's a difference. So can you explain to someone who's trying to make sense of this, like what that difference is?
Sean, this is such a fantastic question. Thank you. I've given, I think, 300 interviews. I've never had this question, and it's really on the mark.
Stop. You can't afford to keep operating this way. You're a smart, successful leader, and right now you're stuck. You know it. And that feeling, it's not weakness. That's data telling you something needs to change. Here's the truth. Saying stuck isn't neutral. It's costing you mentally, professionally every single day. After 10 years coaching C-suite level executives through exactly problems like this, I have built the GAIN framework, and it delivers clarity in just 20 minutes. Sign up for the No Limit Leadership newsletter and get the Unstuck Guide free. The link is in the description. 5 seconds to change everything. Do it now.
So the difference is that your action, the action that you take, comes from an inspired or an internally driven place. And those actions, they feel almost as if they're acting you. So it's like all of a sudden it moves from push to pull energy. So before, when you were quote unquote making it happen, that's gone. There's no making it happen. There is a revealing or an opening to potentials. There's an awakening that happens inside of you, and that then guides all of your behaviors and your actions. Does that make sense? So it's like internally and intrinsically motivated versus externally motivated. So you're not seeking success. You're not doing something with the intention of, will this get me to, be seen or be liked or be whatever. You're already feeling that, see you, like, you connect with yourself, and the actions then arise very spontaneously of themselves, and you will feel a marked difference in the two. Yeah.
No, I feel like there's one reason I want to share this conversation, because I feel like what you're describing has been my journey, maybe over, and just recently, maybe the last like 2 years, honestly. But I feel like it's a journey that has taken me 10 years. I was successful before that for me in the military, right? And every position I had, was highest ranked, promoted above peers, all the way up until, got 2 commands of Green Beret teams, left and then started my first company. I made a couple first early decisions financially, just because I didn't know any better, that I couldn't overcome, no matter how hard I worked, and ran myself into the ground, to the hospital, the panic attacks. I tell people all the time, I spent nearly 2 years of my young adult life in combat and not a single panic attack. And I had 2 my first 3 years as an entrepreneur. But through the work you're talking about, and I just want to give people that perspective. I'm going to come back to, breaking this down a bit more. When I look back, and over years of looking back of that and working with coaches and getting into consciousness and getting all these other things and meditating on, I was like, what I realized was really happening there was that my identity was so tied to being seen a certain way, being seen as a winner, right? I went from Captain America, West Point grad, Green Beret, super, now a business owner, oh my gosh, to then texting my girlfriend, now wife at the time, girlfriend, like, hey, can you Venmo me $20 so I can buy canned tuna for dinner? Like the fall and this identity and this questioning of what I was so scared of was being seen as a failure.
Absolutely.
And so all of that striving, what I realized was actually rooted in fear.
100%. Yes. Beautiful story. And I'm glad you brought this
And so
back.
that's what I'm hearing from you is a bit of a shift. Yeah. A bit of a shift on where is this actually coming from? And so what is that, because what I'm hoping is that through your story and this conversation is someone can sort of create some identification with what we're talking about and then decide to make a shift before hitting the bottom, right, and having to kind of come unglued. And so if someone's identifying, I kind of feel like that striver, I'm always thinking ahead, or actually before we get front, actually, what are the indicators? How does someone know the leading indicators that maybe they're on that path, but they just haven't hit it yet?
Well, let's circle back for just a moment also to identity, right? And this is sort of where we get tripped up. And I think if you just answer kind of the surface level of that question that you just asked us, how do you know? It's sort of a gnarly, again, it's that push energy, and everyone feels it. I've seen that people tend to feel it in different places in their body, but it's it's almost like a holding pattern or a stuckness or a general sense of sort of something's off. And we normally don't pay attention to that. We sort of override it in the sake of, you got to keep going. You have to persist, and persistence is great. But where we're missing the mark, and I love that way of phrasing, actually, to sin means to miss the mark. So where we're missing the mark, where we're getting it wrong, is really the order of things. And I talk about this a lot because once I started to understand that the identity structure that I had created, so the ego, is great. Like people bash the ego all the time, but I always say, I love, I love my ego. I love the ego. The ego is what puts me in a Fortune 50, forget 500, Fortune 50 room and has me present in the way that I do, right? That's the ego. It's the lowercase I. It's the identity you've created. And what's interesting about that is we all kind of create these identities for ourselves. And I talk about a lot about this in my work because once you start to realize that you're not that, but you get to play that part. I was in South Carolina this past week and I was walking down the street and there was something written on the street of like actors are the only honest ones amongst us or something. Like they're at least admitting that they're playing a character. And I thought about that because it was so beautiful, such a beautiful representation of how I feel about characters and all of that. Like the character in and of itself is fun. It's the part you get to play. But there's a deeper truth within you. And when you hit in and connect with that deeper truth and you let that lead the way. And I want to give this a very, very concrete example of what I'm talking about in terms of if someone's there and they're asking, well, what does that look like in practice? I remember distinctly the first times that I was presenting on stage where I said, use me. I was talking to that intelligence, that inner intelligence that's coursing through all of us, the ones we're alluding to with different names in different ways. And I was saying, take over. Like, I want to take this stage with all of the preparation and experience and acumen that I bring in service to this greater intelligence. And what happened to me that day that I took that stage was a complete flip of paradigms. Because before that, like you said, I was in this performance mode. Like I had to perform. I had to be the best. I had to talk in a certain way. My speech had to be structured in certain, and those were fine. It was okay, but it was never really hitting. And it wasn't until that moment that I said, use me. And I gave the character, I put the character in the back seat. I said, yes, character, I love you. You're phenomenal, but you're going in the back seat and this inner intelligence is going to guide us on this stage today. It took 4 hours for them to get me off that because they didn't want me to leave that stage. Like Q&A extended to 4 hours and I didn't even feel it. I didn't feel it in any part of me of working or efforting. I just felt really pulled and really guided. And everything that I had prepared up until then went on these tracks of service for that inner intelligence. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this was an intention. Yeah. What I'm hearing there's like a trust and a loosening of grip of like need to be in control. That is sort of a necessary component of this. And at Novus Global, the firm I'm a part of, a lot of times we talk about these 4 survival needs, and one of them being need to feel in control. Like we make these decisions because we get scared if we don't feel like we're in control. And what I'm hearing from you is that there's a need or a requirement to let go and trust if we are to move out of this sort of fear-based identity drive ego.
Yes. And if you think about it, it's pretty funny that we feel like we can't trust. And of course, trust sits at the foundation of our survival. So I will often say that 99.9999, I don't even know how long that number goes on, percent of what is occurring both within and outside of you, you have to trust in order for your survival. We are that 99.99999, whatever percent, we are in complete and total trust or faith that it's going to keep doing its thing. So I'll give you an example. You have trillions of biochemical reactions occurring in your body every second, right? Every single one of them is coordinated to every other one. Now, you don't stop in the middle of your day and say, oh my God, are all of those chemical reactions doing what they need to do in order for me to keep operating the way I'm operating? You don't stop and really consider or work out a 5-year plan for the electrical impulses that are shooting down from your brain into your body saying, take a step, take another step. You're trusting in that process. In the same way, you don't go to bed at night and wonder, or I mean, at least I hope you don't, wondering if is the sun going to come up, right? And it's not even the sun coming up. It's like, is the earth going to continue to rotate on its axis? And am I going to see the sun again? Is it going to burst into whatever happens with stars, and I'm not going to experience it again tomorrow? you don't go to bed questioning those things, right? We take this infinitesimal part that's left over, this 0.000, again, I don't know how long that goes on, 1% that's left over. And we say, not this. I can't trust this. I've got to control this. If I don't control this, then everything's going to run amok. And that's where we get in a lot of trouble. It's like Shakespeare saying, therein lies the crux, right? You've taken this tiny bit and you said, for me to feel safe, all of this has to go in this way. And actually, that's what I think. And Anthony DeMello does a great job of this in his work. He talks about the Buddha, and when he's talking about the Four Noble Truths, and he says, really, he's not talking about desire. He's talking about your attachment to the desire. And in other words, like I said, if it doesn't go this way, then I can't be okay. And that's that's the trap. That's the ultimate trap. And when you actually start to rest, I'm talking actually not just figuratively, but literally into the fact that not only can you trust, but you must trust if you want to live a life that feels pulled rather than pushed, the way we're talking about, then you start to open up to so many more potentials that were unavailable before. You literally couldn't see them because you were blocking through this tension of so-called control. The reality is we don't control anything, right? So literally I'll tell you though, there is one thing that I have found that we can control, but it's the hardest thing in the world to control. And it is probably the only thing that we should use our free will to try to control. And that is the thought, that is thinking. And very few people actually do think. And if you want, we can talk about that. And it's one of the things that actually, if you took control back for that one thing, which again is the only thing that, as far as I can tell, that you can use your free will on, because you can't control what other people are going to do. You can't control what the environment's going to do. I can't control the fact that the sun isn't shining right now, even though I'm in sunny California at the moment. I can't control those things, right? But the one thing I can is actually learning to think. And it's the one thing that most people will never, ever undergo, because it's the most arduous thing in the world to undergo. So like I said, we can talk more about that, but yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
I want to get to that. And I want to stay on just for a second, all that we have, these achievers, strivers, like we want to achieve the next thing. When we get in the next thing, we're going to be happy or fulfilled, right? Like this striving and the push in my own head, right? When I was doing some work with a coach one time, and she was very much going down you have to be enough. You have to be okay with just you, nothing else, just loving you the way you are right now. And I'm like, what I can't get to is if I sit here while the world burns and when things go and all my family's destroyed or like whatever happens, like there's people I can help. And I sit here, but I'm like, well, I'm good. Like, I'm not okay living that way. Like to me, like I have such a hard time living into that. And so, and recently the CEO of our firm, Novus Global, was on stage with Arthur Brooks and Andy Stanley. And he brought up 2 words that I think are sort of getting to the heart of this. And so I'm wondering what your take is. And if this is a side quest that doesn't make sense in your paradigm, like that's fine. You can tell me that too. But he brought up, the difference between contentment and complacency. And that sort of struck the chord for me there about like, oh, maybe I was creating sort of a false paradigm. I saw these 2 ways of being as mutually exclusive, and maybe they aren't. And so what's your take on it?
Yeah. So there's so much wrapped up in there. First, growth. Let's look at the growth mindset thing. Okay. Because there are like at least 3 different things that I would say, let's go there. The growth mindset is beautiful. It's a natural evolutionary impulse that's coursing through you that's saying there's more. I can be more. I can do more. I can have more. This in and of itself is not the issue. This in and of itself is the way you're designed. So first we have to understand that like growth is beautiful. It's a fabulous part of, in fact, I had a boss once up on behind his desk, he had a big sign. He said, if you don't grow, you die. Right. So it's a little bit like in the Bible, without a vision, the people perish. Having a vision is beautiful. Having a vision to help others is beautiful. At the same time, what we must recognize is the only way to help someone is to truly be the thing you're talking about. And this is again, where a lot of people miss the mark is they say, I'm going to help a bunch of people and I'm going to figure, I'm going to do this thing. But in their representation, like representation or representation of the thing is missing, is lacking. It's like Tolstoy saying, everyone thinks of changing the world. No one thinks of changing himself. So the growth doesn't happen again from something outside of you. It doesn't happen because you went and did this thing. It happens because you are the thing. So when you step into the truth of I am peace, then everywhere you go, you bring peace. When you step into the truth, I am enthusiasm, everywhere you go, you bring enthusiasm. enthusiasm and theos, it comes from in God, in spirit. Are you operating from spirit, or are you operating from fear and lack? If you're operating from fear and lack, you will be in a place of complacency. If you're operating from spirit, you will be, generally speaking, in a place of contentment, of like, I am this and I wish to bring and share and extend this as much as I can. Who it touches is up to them. Who comes to the party, that's up to them. But I'm throwing the party. And that doesn't mean I don't care. And it doesn't mean that the things going around don't matter. They absolutely do matter. But the point is, how can you actually affect them? And you can't affect them unless you change on that very fundamental level, unless you shift your consciousness and your awareness to direct it toward what you want instead of what you don't. Now, a lot of people that are out there advocating for different things, they're directing their attention to what they don't want. They're directing their attention to more violence. They're directing their attention to more diversion. They're directing their attention to things that don't serve the greater purpose. When instead you direct your attention to peace, when you direct it to love, when you direct it to kindness, those are what emanate from you. And those frequencies are, it's like Tesla, right? The great inventor, saying that if you want to understand the nature of reality, study frequency and vibration. You are a set of frequency and vibration. How are you emanating? What are you emanating? What are you choosing? And again, that comes back to your own conscious choice of how you're directing your will, how you're directing your thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if you're cool with it, I want to go even deeper. Is that cool?
I'm all about it, my friend. I'm as deep as they come, man.
All right,
I was born this way. I was
it.
born in an existential
All right,
crisis.
perfect.
I was born and, already thinking about this stuff. Okay, go on. Let the game go on.
All right, beautiful. Cool. So I want to call it one thing and then maybe take us on a little deeper. So what I hear there, which actually is a bit of a new, almost a new framing, but it's a new thought you just gave me. I say there's like basically only two things that can drive us as human beings, and I believe, like either love or fear. Like at the core of whatever you're being driven by, like to me, it either goes to one or the other, love or fear. And what I love that you just pointed out, what came to me was that when we're in the fear state, what we're actually looking at is what we don't want. It's just like what they say when you drive the car, like when you first learn to drive a car, it's like, don't look at the car you don't want to hit driving the other way, because you're going to turn into the car because that's what you're focused on, And so when you are being driven by fear, your focus is on what you don't want, which then makes that thing happen, more likely to happen. And when you're in a love state and you're on what's possible, what's vision, you're more likely to realize that. And so, yeah, the connection between those two of love and fear versus what are you actually thinking about at the time was a bit of a new, that really clicked for me based on what you just said. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the deeper part I want to call out, which would be one issue to go more like spiritual, even like religious on this, okay, would be the difference between like dualistic and non-dualistic religions. And this is an area where I run into interesting conversations with people with certain religious backgrounds, because what I heard you say there was like this consciousness, the spirit, the frequency is really about focusing inward and getting aligned with like what you're connected to. And I sense that you were alluding or had said something about like the divinity there that is all inside of us, which to me occurs as a non-dualistic way to look at spirituality and consciousness. Courtney, one of the things that you did mention before we side quested there a second was how one of the things that we can control that is powerful, and that what I'm interested in is, you said, but most people won't or don't go into, is controlling our thoughts and what we're thinking. Why is that true?
Well, I think it was this guy, McFarland. He was a superintendent, I believe, at some school in the Midwest. And he said 2% of people think, 3% think they think, and 95% would rather die than think. And we have this, it's really funny. The secret, it shouldn't be a secret because it's throughout all the success literature, remains virtually a secret, is that you can learn to think, and that maybe you're not really actively thinking right now. So let's go into it. One, because a lot of times people say, I think, but for most of us, that's the equivalent of saying, I beat my heart. So if you look at thought, right, it appears from what they've discovered in neuroscience that we're having somewhere between 50 to 70,000 thought impulses, which are electrical impulses, a day. And for most people, those 50 to 70,000 thought impulses are the same ones every day. Okay. So the way I like to think about it is these thoughts are literally calcifying you into a character. And even if you take the way they're affecting your behaviors, I remember years ago seeing this study that if you superimposed a person's daily routine, if you took cameras and you shot their routine, videography of their routine every day, you would see the same day kind of superimposed. You would see the person going through the same behaviors every single day, waking up at the same time, turning off their alarm clock, going in the kitchen, fetching a cup of coffee, whatever that looks like, right? And again, it's like the thoughts start to form behaviors and the behaviors are forming the results. Now, the way you know that you're not actively thinking is that you see a lot of results in your life that you don't like. The way to know that you might be in that 3% is that some of the results you see don't really feel that great and they feel kind of gnarly and you're like, I don't like those, but I like these other ones. So part of the time you're actually actively thinking or actively directing the thought. The way to know you're in the 2% is I talk about the 4 ways of getting ice cream is like the 4th way the ice cream just appears, right? The thought impulse occurs to you that you'd like ice cream and the ice cream comes. We can talk about that later if you want, because that's brainwave frequencies and all of that. I love to geek out on stuff like that. But the point that I'm making is simply this. Most of us are not guiding the thought process. In other words, we're not consciously deciding from all of those impulses which ones we're going to entertain. In fact, for most of us, because of the negativity bias that we have, and that's a psychological term that we kind of cling to the things that we don't like, most of us are sort of running on repeat thoughts that actually are, again, forming behavioral patterns and results that we don't like in our life. Now, again, it kind of remains a secret. If you look at the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, most people, that's one of the most sold books. I think maybe the most sold book after the Bible. The interesting thing about that book is that most people will pick it up and they will read it and they will never be able to extract the what Napoleon Hill's talking about. And that is because they're missing the 2 words inherent in that title. If you don't get these 2 words, you kind of miss the boat on Thinking and Growing Rich. And those 2 words are learn to think, learn to direct your thought toward that which you want. Now, you talked about something really beautiful earlier. You said if you're learning how to drive and you're looking in the opposite lane at the car coming on or something like that, they have, you're looking at the thing you don't want, right? And they have a saying for this, by the way, in virtually every sport. Like, for instance, race car driving, they say never look at the wall. In downhill skiing, they say don't look at the trees. Basically, don't put your attention where you don't want to expand or fire up or give oxygen to the thing, right? And so you can start to actually deprive certain thoughts of that oxygen by actively directing your thought. Now, this is probably the hardest work in the world and most people will never undergo it, but the riches that Hill talks about, they're not just financial. They're in every part of your life when you learn how to actually direct your thoughts. And again, most people will shy away from this. And one of the biggest reasons is that why it's so hard is that we are being pummeled by information all the time. And they're all hitting these sensory outputs and inputs that we have, right? And so they're very compelling. If I see an accident, I'm going to probably want to look at the accident, right? If I see some politician doing something crazy, I'm going to kind of want to look at it because it's just so fascinating, right? But again, all of that's a play on form. And if you start to become more inner directed and connect to this inner intelligence that we've talked about, you can start to affect the thought process. And when you do that, the vibrational quality or frequency that you're emitting completely changes. And hence what you start to see in your environment as well. Einstein, he said, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. And I used to take that to mean that he was talking about your environment, right? The environment literally shaping the molecule, which is true. And in 95% of the cases, that's what's happening. But you can take that back and you can cultivate an inner field that also shapes the molecule and you can physically change as a result. I mean, I've had massive physical transformations in my life and my clients' lives and things that, like, I will sometimes in presentations show a picture of me from 10 years ago and the vast majority of the audience doesn't recognize me at all. And I've never had any work done. It's literally just consciousness and the directing of consciousness. So yeah, learning to think is probably the only really wise way to use your free will.
I love that. Learning to think is one of the only, what do you say? Or the best way to use your free will? What would you say?
It's likely the best and only way you should be using your free will. Yeah. Because you don't use your free will to change other people.
You've built something real. The career, the title, the business, maybe all 3. But ever feel simultaneously overwhelmed and bored? Like your calendar is full, your responsibilities keep growing, and yet somewhere deep down, you're no longer expanding. That's the strange reality for a lot of high performers. Not failing, not collapsing, just slowly settling for less than they're actually capable of. Because eventually talent stops being the issue. The real problem is this: nobody in your life is challenging you at the level you actually operate. I spent years sitting across from executives and owners who had every reason to be satisfied, and helping them name what they were actually hungry for. A vision call is one focused conversation, no pitch, no program, just clarity on who you're becoming, what you really want next, and what's standing in your way. You don't need more motivation. You need someone who can see what you can't yet. Go to seanpatton.me/vision. That's seanpatton.me/vision and book your call today, because the life you're capable of isn't going to wait forever.
So it appears to me that thinking is really the only correct use of learning how to think is the only correct use of our free will. So yeah.
It's funny because so often I'll hear it and from others, and maybe it's usually in jest, but kind of maybe not, is, when I think it's too quiet in the car or somewhere and they're like, what am I going to sit here and listen to my own thoughts? No, thank you. Like actively avoiding. We're just so used to distraction and things being input. It's like, sit with my own thoughts. That sounds like the worst thing ever. But as you're stating, like that is sort of the key or the path to this new way of being and defining fulfillment inside of yourself. You mentioned the 4 ways of getting ice cream and how that analogy plays to frequency. And so I'd love to hear that analogy.
So I share this in depth in the second book, but essentially it's like there's 4 ways of getting ice cream. And you can liken this to your brainwave frequencies. The first way is the thought impulse occurs for ice cream. Because remember, I didn't say this before, but neuroscience, it knows all this that, the scientists have said, we have these 50 to 70,000 thoughts every day. But the funny thing is we don't know the origin of thought. So there's not a part of your brain that I can point to, like the prefrontal cortex, and say thought originates there. For most of us, again, you're just having these hits. And that's why, most people don't want to be with those hits. And you're choosing which ones to kind of latch onto. But here's the thing. Again, the first way of getting ice cream is I have the hit, right? So the thought impulse occurs for ice cream. Sometimes this could just be, I saw it in a movie and I want some ice cream. And this first way is, okay, the thought impulse happened. I'm going to go out. It's the middle of the night. It's 3 a.m. and I'm going to, chase around and look for some ice cream. And maybe I find a freezer burn variety at 7-Eleven and I eat it and I feel really sick and like I did the thing though, right? So this is how most people try to get where they're going, is they're operating. It's like the best way I ever heard it described is a 4-gear race car that you're in first gear, right? And this can be likened to beta in the brain, especially high beta. And a lot of people, especially when they're freaking out and they're worried about something, they're in high beta. So you don't have access to creativity. You do tend to be more competitive in nature and all the things that kind of block you off. Second way of getting ice cream, thought impulse occurs for ice cream. And I say, hey, Sean, I call you up and I say, could you grab me a bucket of ice cream? Now, you and I are in different states. So you're probably gonna be like, no, Court. But if we were in the same place, you'd say, Court, I'd love to grab you some ice cream. Where can I get it? And what kind would you like? And I'm like, this is amazing. Here I've enlisted someone else's help. This is akin to alpha. You can very easily move into alpha, by the way. And I talk about this again in the book, like how in instants, moments, you can do it. And just to say it quickly, because someone's going to be like, well, what is a way? One way, for example, is yawning. If you yawn for 30 seconds, you're going to start to move into alpha. And you're also going to release another whole set of neurochemicals that are really powerful. This is all part of our original equipment, which, by the way, we have forgotten how to use and actually been duped into thinking we shouldn't use. Another conversation for another day. So that's beta. And that's the second way. The third way is I think of ice cream and you show up at my door and you're like, hey, Court, I just got this ice cream. I'm not feeling it. It's exactly the kind that I wanted in my imagination, because I wanted whatever that bear ice cream is, and it's chocolate chip. And I'm like, yeah, oh my God, I'll take it. That's amazing. And that's when we call all our friends, right? And we've all had this experience. Like, I was just thinking of this person and then they called me. That is akin to this third way of getting ice cream. And it's like being in theta. Most of us are only experiencing theta right before falling asleep, or as we're falling asleep and as we're waking up. And that's quite unfortunate, because you can experience theta eyes wide open. And that's when your brain is releasing catecholamines, which are vital for learning and memory, is creating all sorts of beautiful, again, like a kind of beautiful chemical cocktail in your bloodstream. Fourth way of getting ice cream is you think of the ice cream and the ice cream just appears seemingly out of nowhere. And this is like, oh my gosh, I was looking for that thing and it just appeared. It appeared where I was looking before and I couldn't find it. Why? Because you're in delta. Now, these are not the only brainwave frequencies that you can experience, but they're the ones I like to talk about because everyone has access. And most of the time you're getting it right before you wake and right before you go to sleep. And this is why that's prime real estate for really programming your mind. But anyhow, this fourth way of getting ice cream basically is you think it and it appears. And again, delta is where you're releasing human growth hormone. It's where you're basically rejuvenating. You are real-time youthing. So those are the 4 ways.
This episode with Cortney McDermott was going so well, we didn't want to stop. So this is the end of part 1. Stay tuned in a few weeks for part 2 with Cortney McDermott as we dive into the 4 types of ice cream and your brainwaves. Thanks for being a part of the No Limit Leadership family. This isn't just a podcast. We're building a movement of no limit leaders driven to unlock our greatness and lead the world forward. If this made you think or gave you something useful, please, 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 right now, go hit follow and then share it with one leader you believe in. Challenge limits, develop leaders, fuel greatness.